I was beaten. I was nearly drowned in the toilet for wetting the bed.
Mm.
I was left on the side of the road in the middle of the rain. They just drove off, dropped me off. This foster parent decided that it was a good idea to lock me in a dark closet as punishment. And so as a child, I was frightened. I was fearful of abandonment. I was scared. It was just a terrible experience. And I couldn't figure out as a child why these things were happening. And it still impacts me today.
What's going on, top of the world's world-class visionary? And this is Last of a Dying Seed, where we use cinematic scenes to expose unseen narratives in the real world. And one of these narratives that we exposing today is by Chris Moore, and the movie that he chose that best relates to his life experience is Instant Family. Now, tell the people, why did you choose that movie as best relating to your life?
All right. Thank you. First, I want to thank you for the work that you do to bring awareness to these kinds of issues.
Absolutely.
I think it's critically important that people be aware of this. And so the reason I chose Instant Family is because I was a foster child myself. I grew up in foster care, and I know the pitfalls, and I want to bring awareness to the problem of foster children being the the ride to from foster care to prison, that pipeline. I want to disrupt that.
Right.
And the movie highlights the difficulties of especially the trauma that kids in foster care go through,
Right.
and feeling unloved, feeling unwanted, all the trauma that they go through. So it's an important movie because I related to that in so many different ways. And here I am, I'm a product or a product of that environment, that foster care problem that needs to be addressed and fixed.
All right. So how so? I'm curious to know how so. Like, what was the circumstances surrounding your displacement as a child that made you a foster child?
Okay, I was born premature. So I had to spend weeks in an incubator. And during that time, my birth parents walked out of the hospital and never returned.
Mm.
So I was abandoned at birth. And that left only Child Department of Children's Services to take over my life.
Mm.
And for the first 6 years of my life, I spent going from foster home to foster home to foster home. And the problems compounded with each foster home because even though the government subsidizes, uh, the living conditions for the child, not all foster parents are loving. Not all foster parents are caring, and I had to experience that that trauma,
Mm.
and it affected me that way. And like a lot of children, there's these grim statistics that show that if you're in foster care or you age out of the foster care system, you have a much higher percentage of doing drugs, going to prison, being jobless, and homeless. So th- those are the problems that we're trying to address.
Right. And that's interesting that you say that too, because that directly ties into the movie and the beginning scene when they try to take the foster parent class, and the lady stood up there who was the foster child, and she broke down those statistics that when you age out of
Exactly.
foster care within the first 2 years, you're likely to become homeless, addicted, or in prison. And you're in prison right now, for those who don't know, serving a life sentence right now, correct?
That's correct.
All
I'm
right.
serving a life sentence under the three strikes law.
Mhm. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I can imagine that growing up as a foster child, like the only consistency you had in your life was inconsistency. You know,
Absolutely.
people, places, and things just coming and going. And with that being so, for a foster child, that can cause you to lean on one of the two extremes as to being clingy to everything and everyone that came into your life, or to completely just
That's right.
not caring and being the first one to drop people or places or things because you don't believe it's going to stay that long anyway. Like, what side did it push you on
That's
as
right.
a kid?
Well, for me, it actually fell right on both sides because I did become clingy, but at the same time, because I was afraid of being abandoned.
Mm,
Like throughout the foster care system, you're pulled out of one and then you're put into another one. And the one time I did find a good foster home, they put me in a good foster home. I didn't want to leave,
mm,
and they treated me like a human being, and I felt safe and loved and wanted. But when that the social services worker came to get me, I knew what she was there for. And I remember fighting and crying and trying to run away just to keep from her pulling me away from that home.
mm,
There's a scene toward the end where the daughter, the foster daughter, runs away because she thinks that it they don't love her, that they don't understand her, that she feels unworthy and unloved. And I related to that scene so much because I felt the same way. I recently attended a prison compassion project class about 2 months ago. And in that, it was about maybe 50 to 60 people who participated. And the facilitator asked everyone to stand up and form a circle. And she asked everybody questions about their childhood.
right,
When you were a child, did you experience abuse? Did you witness abuse? Were you screamed at? And everybody took a step forward because that was the requirement. If you had a yes answer to it, you would step forward. Everyone in that group stepped forward. Almost all the people experienced some form of childhood trauma. And it occurred to me how much the trauma we experience as children, these
mm,
adverse experiences as children, impact who we are today as adults and play a huge role in why many of us are here in prison today.
right. And if you could, like, because a lot of people may be unfamiliar with that world, like the life of a foster child and how these traumatic experiences can interfere with your psychological development.
Yeah,
Specifically the part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, which deals with your decision making. What
absolutely.
do right or do wrong. You know what I'm saying? But by all
Yeah,
means, do what you got to do to survive. And for a child that's operating purely
absolutely.
off emotion, like it often causes them, correct me if I'm wrong, to self destruct. So,
No, you're
what
right.
was more specifically some experiences that you had that created your mentality that led you to where you are today?
Okay. So specifically, I was part of many foster homes,
Mm,
but one foster home in particular was very abusive. I was beaten. I was nearly drowned in the toilet for wetting the bed.
mm,
I was left on the side of the road in the middle of the rain. They
wow,
just drove off, dropped me off. Uh, this foster parent decided that it was a good idea to lock me in a dark closet as punishment. And so, as a child, I was frightened. I was fearful of abandonment. I was scared. Uh, it was just a terrible experience. And as a child, our brains, like you just pointed out, aren't developed enough to kind of process the behavior of what's being done to us.
right,
And so I did what any child would do is I fought to survive.
right,
And that meant just closing myself off to the rest of the world, becoming distrustful. And I was angry and I was embittered because of what was going on because I had no control of it.
right,
And the children don't have control over where they're placed and who they're placed with. There's a scene in the Instant Family where there's a with the daughter, the foster child, the daughter, the teenager is carrying around this plastic bag, this trash bag.
mm,
It represents everything that she owns, and she kind of makes light of it in the movie that hey, this is the stereotypical foster child carrying
right,
around their life in a trash bag,
right,
and it's symbolic because of the burden that children carry. That all the burden, all the weight, and the trash that they endure, and this is the sum of their lives, and they never know when they're going to be asked to be picked up and moved to a different foster home. And
right,
so those experiences, those traumatic experiences, led to me being standoffish, angry, bitter, not trusting anybody. and it
Right.
translated into me in my teenage years into committing crimes.
Mm.
And you know, in that movie, it emphasized the difficulty of fostering older children because she
Mm.
was a teenager when she was brought into the foster care system.
Right.
And so it highlights those difficulties. And for me, it wasn't so much about being homeless because I've been in prison for most of my adult life. So I entered the prison system when I was 19 years old, and I did a stretch, and I've spent probably no more than 2 years of my entire adult life in the prison system. So there's that statistic coming alive in my life, uh, and I'm sure, and it comes in life into the life of others too, who have aged out of the foster care system or who have been through foster care system
Right.
and experienced a lot of trauma.
Right. And for real quick, for those who don't know, how long you been down so far?
I've been down 18 years
18 years.
on the three strikes case. 18 years.
All right. And when you talked
So
about making it hard to process as a the information as a child, what he's going through, did what you was going through, how people was treating you at such a vulnerable stage in your life, did you start to blame yourself somewhat? Like, why is people doing this to me? Is there something wrong with me?
absolutely. I
Mm,
wrote a story not too long ago that kind of captured that. It's called Ugly Baby.
mm,
And it it captures how I saw myself. There must be something wrong with me. There's something that I'm not worthy of love. I'm
uh,
unlovable. And because of the treatment, I couldn't figure out as a child why these things were happening to me. And it still impacts me today when I think about it and how strongly it impacted how I viewed myself, that I was somehow flawed. I was somehow a mistake. There was something wrong with me. I was not a pretty baby. I was an ugly baby deserving of ugly treatment. And
right,
that's kind of what a lot of foster children experience in the view of themselves. There's low self-esteem. There's very little motivation. There's a lot of depression. And
right.
so, yeah, that's a good question. Very good question.
And out of the oldest of the three siblings, it was hard for her to accept, you know, love and affection because of
That's
the
absolutely.
hurt that she's been feeling for so long from so many people. Like, when these strangers come into her life that are more sincere, she's still looking at it like, man, you just like everybody else. So, did you have that same mentality where someone who was sincere told you they loved you and it was hard to accept it because of what you've been through?
Yes, absolutely. I
Mm,
couldn't trust anybody. And even, my foster mother, and when she tried care for me, the good one, I was, was skeptical because
right,
I thought it was just, an act.
right,
That ultimately you don't love me. There's nothing worthy about me, or nothing about me that's worthy of love. So why do you love me? Why
mm,
do you want to take care of me? And
right.
so that was very difficult for me to grasp.
What are some of the coping techniques that you use today that gets you through the trauma that you've experienced for so long?
Some of the coping techniques, that's a good question, that I've learned over the years attending groups, is self-talk is very important.
Mm,
Telling yourself that you are worthy, you are important, that you can do this is very important in my strategy to overcome the thinking that I was grew up with and the
right,
abuse.
right,
Another technique, coping strategy is, I I like playing tennis and I like socializing. I like being around people.
mm,
I've opened myself up to being vulnerable. That was a big step for me. Is the vulnerability, is allowing myself to be exposed to harm around people that I've learned to trust, and
right,
that was a big step for me. Being able to communicate and talk and reach out to other people who have been similarly situated in foster care. That's a big thing for me. Learning about their stories, hearing them talk about what they went through and being able to relate to that. Just going out and being social. It's one of the biggest coping and most important coping strategies that I use because it keeps me grounded, it keeps me rooted. And as part of the amends that I make is and hope it keeps them rooted and keep them focused on their journey of healing and recovery from all the trauma from foster care.
Right. All right. And you're an insider, so the movie also touches on the struggles of the foster parents when you're trying to become a
Yes.
newly foster parent and
Yeah.
how difficult that is, especially taking in kids that's already in development and operating off trauma. So it
Yes.
shows the ups and downs that they go through and lessons they had to learn that you couldn't read in the book. You know,
You're right.
so what was some
You're right.
certain situations you went through with your foster parents to like break that ice?
You know, I don't ever think I encountered a situation where I did break that ice with my foster parents. I
Mm,
never got a glimpse into what they were thinking and how they felt and the struggles that they were going through in terms of, fostering a child. It never occurred to me, and that discussion never came up. But I know
wow,
in the movie they make light of it, and there's a scene in there where they're sitting on their in the bed rethinking what this foster care, and it's almost funny because they're like, no, oh, she's so horrible, oh, I can't believe how horrible she is, no, let's not, this is not, just walk away.
right, right,
And and it was done in a kind of comical, almost humorous way, but there's a reality to that
mm,
because that's what happened to me is my parents chose to walk away from the responsibility of parenting me
wow,
and ultimately left me in the arms of a broken system.
right. And what's some of the things that from your knowledge that like the media doesn't show about the reality of foster care from your experience?
Yes. Um, I would think the difficulty, the amount of transition that a foster child has to make going from foster home to foster home.
Mm,
That was really traumatic and difficult for me. Is to look upon a new face, a stranger, and to trust them to with my life, with feeding me, with caring for me, with sending me to school and those kinds of things. And then have that taken away to be moved to another foster home in a different area, in a different town, or in a different room, a different house. It was all very scary. And
right,
especially the younger you are, the more traumatic it is because you really don't understand what's going on.
right,
My last foster mother, I couldn't believe, and for some reason I had thought that she was my mother because she was kind to me, and I couldn't believe that she had not given birth to me. One day she told me, I didn't give birth to you.
mm,
And I was like, what? And it was just at that moment I didn't realize that I guess I was striving to be so attached to her,
right,
so that I wanted her to be my mother. And when she
wow,
told me that she wasn't the one who gave birth to me, that she's not really my mother,
mm,
that really kind of hurt me. It destroyed me in a way because I was like, what? And I was still young. I was only about 6 or 7 years old, and
oh,
I still
right,
hadn't learned about the birds and the bees and how that works.
right,
But it's just, I was naive as a child because of, the life that I lived. But and I was damaged. But I think that the progress that I made growing up helped me to understand the challenges that foster children experience. And for me, it was going from home to home.
man, that's deep. And after all this time, looking back on your life and not only what happened to you, but your response to life as you went along your journey, what do you take responsibility for?
Well, I've learned to take responsibility for all of my decisions.
Mm,
And the reason why is because ultimately it is my decision. It is my choice,
all right,
right? To to not do something that I know is wrong is within my power, and it to not do it. And so I have to take responsibility because at some point I have to. There
Mm,
are a lot of people, a lot of kids who've gone through the foster care system who have been traumatized, who have been abused, who have been neglected, but yet they don't go on to make really terrible life decisions that
mm,
land them in prison. And so I have to be mindful of that fact
right,
and take responsibility for my decisions,
right,
how I feel, what I think, the coping strategies that I use. I have to be responsible for all of it. And it empowers me because now I know that the choices that are made lie within myself.
right,
The strength of resolve to live a healthy, good life is all up on me. I can't put that responsibility on other people.
right. And when we being in a certain lifestyle and been doing things a certain way for so long, we don't have to put it into words because this is what we do. We do it. We've been through it, and this is how we operate. But when you watch this movie, what did it help you put into words? You know what I'm saying? Like, even though you come from that and you're an insider, what was it about this movie that helped you put a certain life lesson into words or a certain bit of insight into words?
The ending was really impactful for me because it taught me that family is not necessarily something you're born into.
Mm,
Family is something you discover, and it takes an active, proactive approach to finding the family that you connect with.
right.
And you might find it in the strangest of places. And I want to give a shout out to a really dear friend of mine, Frank Howard,
Mm,
who we served 4 years in prison, and we got really close. And he's like family to me.
right.
And it's really important to discover who your family really is, who they are.
Right.
And that's what I took away from the movie is that it's not all bad because in the end of that movie, they were united legally as a family, and it ended, in a fairy tale kind of way for that family, for those children. But for most children, it doesn't end like that,
Right.
especially those who age out of the foster care system.
Right.
But even then, family is still something that you can discover. And I'm still discovering that. I'm building my family as I progress through life. And I'm putting together this really healthy family that does love me,
Right.
that I can trust, that I can talk to, and that will help me through the issues that I have been through.
Right. And what would be something that you would say to newly foster kids who haven't taken that journey yet, but now they're going through their own displacement and they're able to view your because everybody has phones now, whether you get a $50 phone, $35 phone, and it has access to YouTube. So if they can watch your
Sure.
video and hear your words, somebody who's already trudged that path before them, what would you say to them?
I would tell them the first and most important thing is you are loved, you are worthy, and that no matter what happens to you, you are still a precious, lovable, worthy human being, worthy of love and worthy of attention. And just because you're not getting it that in that moment because of the conditions you might live in, trust in your potential as a human being and the humanity in general to know that eventually your time will come to be loved and you will succeed. You just have to kind of bear with it, grit, just kind of trudge through the mud a little bit. But in the end, what tore me apart and what damaged me so much was believing that I was unworthy. And that was never true. I was worthy. I was lovable. And that's what I would like to convey to children who are just now going through the foster care. You are worthy. Just to hammer that message that you are worthy and you are loved. There's nothing wrong with you.
Right. Like what are some of your plans?
Well, one of my plans is that I'm in college right now,
All right.
and I like to get my degree in in the social services or counseling, so that I could so that I could counsel people I really like to counsel people.
All right.
I believe I'm right now. I'm taking a class called Transformative Mediation, where we learn to listen and to resolve disputes in a peaceful way. And a lot of those mediation processes that we involve ourselves in involve trauma, and to be informed of the trauma and understand how to deal with other people's trauma is very important
Right.
in mediation. And so I'd like to do that. I'd love to teach tennis because I play it a lot. And I like to use that as a platform to get through to foster kids, to get through to adults who have struggled with that kind of trauma, and to use tennis as a physical way of releasing some of that tension and
Mm,
anxiety, and to build up their self-esteem and to teach them that they are worthy and loved.
that's interesting. That's interesting. And man, it was a deep conversation, man. And I want to talk about because when you've been beat up by the world for so long, I can imagine just what I went through, how hard it was to forget. Feelings of resentment, you know, feeling like the world was against me, so that gave me the fuck the world mentality. But it wasn't to the extreme, you know what I'm saying? Your journey was different. But how hard it was for me to forgive, like how hard was it for you to start forgiving?
It took a little bit for me to learn to forgive what had happened to me, but I had to first forgive myself. I had to first discover, you know, that I am a human being worthy of love, that a lot of the trauma that I went through wasn't my fault. But it also taught me that the people who did this to me, and the system itself, it was mostly the people, they have their own trauma. There's that saying that hurt people.
Right.
And so I realized, how damaged not just I was, but how society was in general, because a lot of us aren't dealing with it in healthy ways. And all we do is pass it on from generation to generation. And so that helped me forgive the people who had done these things to me growing up. And it allows me to forgive on neutral grounds people that I see who suffer from the same type of trauma. So it's important. I think you hit on a really good point about talking about forgiveness,
Right.
because that's really, really important to forgive yourself and to be able to forgive others, because that burden is so heavy to carry around your life. And all it does is bog you down
That's it.
and make it hard to enjoy life.
That's it. So, man, this was a powerful conversation, and I just hope that more people. I hope that this interview exceeds both our expectations as to the viewer impact that it can have for those who went through foster care, those who's going through foster care, and those who never been there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It this is just we're shedding light on humanity and what people go through, what kids go through, and what you went through that caused you to develop the mentality you had, that caused you to make the decisions you made, that led you to where you are, is not the end all be all. And you're showing that because you're in college, highly educated, can articulate yourself. You're back in touch with your humanity. You have a good relationship with yourself and others, and you have a positive outlook as to your future despite your circumstances. So I just know that this is going to carry, and I'm honored to even get your story out there.
Oh, thank you. And I'm honored to have been part of your mission to make awareness, to bring awareness to these kinds of issues, and to bring awareness to stories like mine.
All right, now this is Chris Moore, you know, Last of a Dying Seed, where we use cinematic scenes to expose unseen narratives in the real world. Yeah.
And so, to your point about being more than the biggest mistake I've ever made in my life, that's very important to understand.
Right.
I'm not the sum of all my mistakes.
Right.
I am the sum of a whole lifetime of experiences, some good and some bad. And I just recently finished reading the autobiography of Viola Davis called Finding Me.
Mm.
And it is a magnificent story of triumph over childhood abuse because she experienced a lot of childhood abuse. Now, she wasn't part of the foster care system,
Right.
but just the trauma that she experienced, the racism, being called ugly, and I related to that.
Right.
All these things. And she relied on the love and the comfort and the support of her sisters to make it through life to where she is today. She is an extraordinarily strong woman who inspires me so much after reading her
Mm.
autobiography, Finding Me by Viola Davis.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah, she's amazing. And it's crazy because I sent that book to someone in prison, but I still ain't read it myself. So I'm gonna make it my mission to read it.
Do that. Do that. I encourage you to do that.
Right.
And anybody who watches this, I'd encourage them to go find that book, Finding Me by Viola Davis, and read it with your heart. You will
Absolutely.
be moved beyond belief.
Absolutely.